really press your luck, and so forth. You may as well take up a hobby, work for a lobby, and so forth. You may as well take up...
Well, good evening, dear friends. It's the last day of February in the year 2013. Bet you never thought we'd get here so fast, right? But here we are. And what I wanted to talk about tonight is what's bugging you lately. That's what we always do here on Public Affairs, Public Access. When Colby is in the house, we do talk about the things that have been, dragging you down or confusing you or giving you a boost or taking you for a ride. Whatever it is, the things that are happening now that you wish you knew more about, because what you get on the mainstream media and on all your various TV channels, your radio channels, your print media, even the conversation over the water cooler, if you still have any of those, all of that leaves you still in the dark about some of the things that are going on. Am I right? Am I right? Yes. Did I say, am I wrong? Well, no, because you know I'm right about that. You still want more information. You're going to get it here tonight because we're going to cover the territory. We're going to cover the waterfront, if you like that kind of analogy, and it might be appropriate because people have been talking for some time now about a wet ceiling that has to be attended to. A wet ceiling, yes. For some months now, you've heard people discussing the fiscal cliff that we face here in the United States if people don't get their act together. And which people? Well, you know which people, the big boys in D.C. on both sides of the aisle and at the top of the big chair. Those boys that can't seem to get it together on the benefit, for the benefit of the rest of us who are, the working stiffs, the intelligentsia, and the freeloaders who just happen to be watching shows like this so they'll know what to say at the water cooler. But anyway, the biggest talk over recent months is about averting a fiscal cliff. That's what it's about, and it's something that haunts Americans today. You can just picture a fiscal cliff in front of us. A lot of people imagine that it's right on the outskirts of wherever it is they live, this fiscal cliff, and of course you have to know exactly what it is, and people are a little confused about whether this is metaphoric or not. So if we can just slow down and get into it. Where is this fiscal cliff? Well, you saw the picture there, and in this particular instance, I'm going to tell you that it's Cleveland, but it could just as easily be Seattle. It could be Flagstaff, Arizona. You have people looking for this fiscal cliff. And the people in that picture, by the way, were a whole bunch of skateboarders. Some of them forgot to bring their skateboards, but a lot of these people, thrill seekers, by definition, want to go to a place where there's a big drop. Roller coaster philosophy, that sort of thing. So a lot of people are physically looking for a fiscal cliff. Some people are confused, though, when they hear the talk from the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats saying that the fiscal cliff needs to be averted, and then the Republicans saying things like, you can't raise taxes on the bitch. Weird things. You can't raise taxes on the mob creators. That's what they say. And people say, what on earth does that mean? But, there are hit records out there. Like there's a reggae star, you may be familiar with, a cousin of Jimmy Cliff, and his name is Fiscal Cliff. I like this guy. He looks a little bit like me in my prime when I was a reggae singer. I did that for maybe 18 months. But anyway, a lot of people read code words in some of this Republican language that goes around, and they think the Republicans might be talking about the guy who wrote, you can't raise taxes on this bitch. And he's pretty cool, but that's not really what's being talked about. What's being talked about is, I'll tell you the truth, a financial matter. And some people say a critical financial matter. This nation has got to get its act together. When we did have the fiscal cliff, what happened? We averted it, but only by putting things off for a little while. That's the bottom line. That's what you hear on TV if you're going to watch CNN or the networks, or if you're going to read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. That's what you've been told. That right ahead of us, and I'm talking to you on the 28th of February in 2013, right ahead of us is a really bad situation. But I'm going to tell you something right now, just so we can be on level terms. It's not really that bad. The United States, yes, is in trouble, but it's not that bad. And I've got something I can show you right here. Look at this. The United States does owe a couple of $1,000s to all of its debtors out there, and we don't have to get into who they are. I think most of you know that. Most of you that hang out at Walmart and, well, anyway, most of you know that. But it's and for a lot of us, that $2,000 some odd dollars coming due real quick now, that would be a stretch. Am I right? But the fact is, the United States could just make the monthly payment. It's about $60, and we would be out of the crisis. That's the bottom line, and that's what I'm going to tell you. But everybody else is going to tell you that it's serious business, and that what's coming up next is all sorts of cuts to all sorts of important programs. This situation is so bad that it caused the Pope to resign. You haven't figured that out yet? Well, that is kind of another story. I don't think there's really time to explain all of it, but it's interesting because now we're going to have a new Pope, and I tried to get this together for you tonight, a little peek preview here at the papal election that's going to be going on, and the rules they have, the papal debates they're going to have, and I think I heard Mitt Romney is trying to get in on that. But anyway, like I say, it's another story. I'm telling you that the U.S. government has a lot of money hidden in a lot of places, so there isn't that much to really worry about. But everybody else on the street, they are saying, now we have to deal with sea castration. And I must admit, that sounds pretty awful. But I think they've messed up the terminology a little bit. You also hear the Democrats talking loudly this week, saying that we have to stop the semester, and I'm sure a lot of college students that are ready for spring break agree with that. But the point they're all trying to make is they're saying we have to cut essential services for all sorts of people, or what they're going to say are non-essential services, just so that we can keep things going here. I want to tell you, when there's talk of cutting programs, a lot of you out there, my listeners, you're pretty intelligent and you keep up with what's going on. A lot of people out there are not so sharp. A lot of people, when they hear that programs are going to be cut, are worried about what they're watching on TV. Like this season, Interesting Person, or The Amazing Racist, or Gay Anatomy, American Eyeball. They say, oh my God, they're going to cut some programs. And then they worry, will I still be able to watch them on Hulu and Netflix, if they're cutting them? I mean, In particular, this year I wanted to watch all of the episodes of Dancing with White-Collar Criminals. And you're saying they're going to cut the programs? Well, hey, slow learners out there, that's not the programs they're going to cut. What they want to do is to reduce all of those benefits for non-employment and things. And you know, there's not that many places where nuns can fill in anymore. But once again, that's another story. What I came here to tell you tonight, I don't believe that we really have a financial crisis. But if we've got to make a bunch of changes just to keep the ship from sinking, I've got some suggestions. I want to tell you about a bunch of programs that you may not have heard of that are tucked away in that federal budget of ours. Things that in the past have been justified as a pivotal, landmark. Well, they've been called all sorts of things, but some of them have been hidden away in parts of the budget so that you don't hear much about them now, if you ever did. And I question the value of quite a few of them. If we have an economic crisis, I'm saying there's plenty of places where we can cut the fat, you know, the pork barrel spending. Let me give you some examples here first. I want to start with one that really is it was a good idea once, the jungle highway system that you may know something about. Parts of the, now here's the thing, my listeners, people who watch this show regularly, I know you're very informed, you know what's going on, you know a lot about American history, and you know about current events, but there are people out there that think America is just this loose collection of some large urban areas and then some little rural outposts, you know, with farms and whatnot. And then as you go out west, you see big expanses of desert and whatever. But the fact is, as the bright ones among you know, America is mostly rainforest. I mean, it is about 95% jungle undergrowth. Yes, it is. If you haven't been out of the house or out of town lately, then you probably don't know that. But many years ago, and in fact, I think based on my research, this started way back in the days of Lewis and Clark on those early expeditions. In those days, it was a really good idea, or it seemed like a really good idea, to start building a jungle highway system even before we had modern vehicles, the type we think of. In those days, you had more primitive means of transport. But the jungle highway system got started way back when, and then back in the 60s when we were looking at all sorts of interesting things to do after the interstate highway system got started, people said, let's expand this jungle highway system because it's the quickest way to get us from this point to that point and so on. And I remember back in college, I enjoyed, and by the way, we spent something like $1 trillion on these jungle highways. And back in college days, I remember going from one place to another relatively close. I always took the jungle highway. It was more scenic. Of course, in those days, we didn't have the big SUV gas muzzlers like we have now, and they probably wouldn't fit on a jungle highway. I mean, a lot of these jungle highways, a lot of them were started and never finished, and a lot of them are not maintained. But the biggest problem these days is that the maps that you used to be able to find to tell how to get from, say, Houston to Chicago via the via the jungle highway, the maps have all been mysteriously removed from reference books, and you can't find them on the internet. So if you set out on one of the jungle highways, good luck getting to where you're going. The last couple of times I've been out using my favorite routes, it was kind of scary. If you have your wife or daughters in the car, they'll want to stop every now and then to go to the bathroom, and there's not that many facilities out there on the jungle highways. And even worse, you have the occasional puma and so forth that might interrupt your travel. But that's why I'm saying, after $1 trillion spent already, and with $100 billion on target for the next year, it might be time to just say goodbye to the jungle highway system, and you'll have to do your best getting around on these paved concrete roads, bridges, interstate highways. You see what I mean? It's not so bad, but we could save a lot of money there. And there are other ambitious programs that have been tried in the past. There's one in the Department of Energy that appeals to me, or I'm saying used to appeal to me, but the veneer has now worn off. And there was a pumpkin energy project, which was based on pushing these pumpkins, like you see in the picture here, pushing pumpkins really close together. Apparently what happens when you do that, pumpkins, they get really hot. I mean, they're sexually excited. I mean, for pumpkins to be pushed together in close quarters like this, I don't know the appeal that one pumpkin sees in another. Frankly, I mean, I've asked scientists to explain to me what makes a pumpkin anyway. The pumpkins seem to get hot and bothered, so hot that scientists back in the 70s thought they could use this heat from the pumpkin squeezing process here to generate some sort of a heat-related energy source. You see what I mean? Like, well, there are some things you'd be familiar with. You have hot air balloons, and so there was a pilot program, I think it was 1977, 78, somewhere in there, where huge vacuum-sucking devices were placed in the Congress where a lot of hot air was being generated, and they tried to use this hot air to power certain things. They couldn't really keep the building, air conditioned or heated using this, so they sort of gave up on that. But there were school lunch programs focusing on beans. The mechanics of that, I mean, you can probably figure it out. For a while, government scientists followed Ted Nugent around to see if they could use some of his dissonant energy to power vehicles. But as I say, a lot of these hot air related or just heat generated type energy projects, they didn't work too well because for transportation, for example, we don't have that many hot air balloon systems. I mean, when we started building the jungle highways, we cut way back on air balloon transport, and so it just never got off the ground. And that right there, you're talking about $40 billion that's still being spent pushing pumpkins into close quarters. And it's not the only thing like that. For example, we also have a terrified rooster approach. And to me, this sounds like some zany scientist who's been watching too many late-night movies, but they put roosters on this treadmill where they feel relatively calm at first, and then they start playing the music by Fiscal Cliff. I mean, the reggae artist, and roosters hate that. I mean, they hate it, and they head for the hills. I mean, figuratively, they try to run and escape and get away, but they can't get away, so they just keep spinning that treadmill. And in one of these zany projects, it was a pilot project under the Department of Energy. They tried to use the energy of these terrified roosters to, you see what I mean. There's another $20 million. It wasn't much, $20 million, but we get rid of programs like this that aren't going anywhere, then we can all be living on easy street the way we do today. But that's not all. People today talk about the internet, and the internet is valuable to a whole lot of us, of course, but in this age of terrorist threats, people worry about cyber warfare and things like that. So there's another project, Department of Homeland Security is running this one, which has a pretty large budget, and you probably haven't heard about it, but you might have seen some evidence of it, like this. Here's what I'm talking about. Smoke signals. Now, you might say, well, I remember from grade school or high school when I read about American history that, for example, certain Indian tribes used to communicate using smoke signals, all right? So some bright people in the Department of Homeland Security started thinking, well, if our internet is attacked, you know, and so many people depend on our internet, we'd better have a backup system. Okay, so the first backup system for the internet was having a healthy, robust, you know, investigative-oriented press corps. But you know the sorry state of mass media today, so you couldn't really rely on the mainstream media to get information out to people or to allow them to communicate with each other. And of course your phone system, well, you know you don't want to trust that because, well, that's also the subject of another story. So let me hold that one back for just a minute. But you can see what happened. They were looking for ways to back up the massive communication that goes on via the electronic infrastructure, the internet. And they said, what about these smoke signals? Well, you can see the problems. You can see the problems. First of all, it was tested in various urban areas, this new backup for the internet, and most people didn't know what the smoke signals were saying. The vast majority. Only a few did. They tended to be either cab drivers or pregnant women in the 7th month of the term or something like that, as well as foreign diplomats, and only from certain parts of the world. It doesn't make sense. Most people did not realize that smoke signals were conveying anything. And even if they could understand it, there was another problem. There was another problem. Our smoke signals were being decoded by the Chinese. And you know, they've already tried to attack our internet infrastructure. As soon as they saw what was going on in this pilot project, they started going into the major urban areas and keeping track of these attempts at signal communication via smoke. They decoded what was being said, even though most of the population couldn't. And the Department of Homeland Security said, uh-oh, got a problem here unless we can code this smoke. And that's where things were starting to get hung up. I mean, we were already spending a lot of money on smoke generators. Now, mostly they got them from rock bands. So most of the smoke generating equipment, you know, rock bands go out of business all the time. Department of Homeland Security got a good deal on a lot of these things. But the other problem is, you know, the internet is pretty fast, and they were not able, at last time I checked anyway, no one in the community of scientists working for our National Security Agency and Department of Homeland Security could figure out a way to make the smoke signals as fast as our internet communication. They're still trying, I understand, but while they're trying, they're spending $300 billion of our dollars. Wouldn't you like to have that back? I mean, to be spent on something a little bit more logical, a little bit more sustainable. While I'm talking, let me just add one last thing before I leave this subject. You know, there are certain cities in America where the air pollution is so bad that people couldn't even tell that there were smoke signals going on in the background. See what I mean? I mean, our intelligence community, such as it is called, rarely takes that kind of thing into account. And another thing they don't take into account is how people feel when they find out how they are being surveilled, how the government is keeping track of them. And that brings me to another program that I really have a problem with. It's the Shoe Detection Service, called the SDS. You may remember an SDS from back in the 60s that was a lot more popular and constructive than the Shoe Detection Service, but here's what it comes down to. Some years back, people in the National Security Agency decided that one of the best ways to track people's movements, obviously, would be to have detection in their shoes. Now, let's just state the obvious. They couldn't necessarily start by having everyone's shoes already tagged, without doing some really black bag job type work. In other words, sneaking into people's homes in the middle of the night. And let me come back to that, because that's how the program really got upended and brought onto the nightly news, 11 o'clock, where you see the grisly stories of what people do, you know, and what you find in dumpsters, etc. But all of the new shoes, even women's shoes, and even track shoes made since 2001 were made with the detectors already built in. And as I say, people didn't find this out for a long time until some scientific types, you know, science fair project guys, guys that tinker around in their home laboratories and so forth, working on things, discovered the squeaky sounds that shoes were making, trying to communicate one to another, a development that was not anticipated, of course, by the National Security Agency. And in the course of all of the black bag jobs where people's shoes were being retrofit, i.e. Old shoes being made detectable, and by the way, you know, it just never made any sense to me how they were going to keep track of so much information. I mean, I know I walk a lot every day, and sometimes I jog, and I'm just thinking gigabytes of information about myself, and it just goes around in a loop. But anyway, like I say, two things blew this up in the face of the intelligence agencies. One is some of these scientific experimenters who discovered it got into the habit of stealing other people's shoes whose data they wanted to read more of, okay? Stealing other people's shoes, which, and of course, since that's a sexual fetish, it wasn't discovered right away, but pretty soon the evidence was clear that something was going on that hadn't happened before, you know, lots more shoes being stolen. And as I say, then the shoes trying to communicate with each other as they became self-intelligent, and then, well, one thing leads to another. But you know, they tried this. You go back in Russian history, back in the Stalinist era, when the government wanted to keep track of all of the citizens, a similar thing was tried in Stalin's Russia. Yes, indeed. And how did people respond there? Well, they stopped they stopped wearing shoes. That's right. Now, what happened there, of course, was that a whole lot more frostbite cases, and it's an ugly story. I don't want to get into it, but what I'm telling you is this. Cover's been blown on this so-called sensitive surveillance technique that the government uses to keep track of your behavior and especially your movements. And since the cat is out of the bag, I don't see any operant justification for spending $27 billion a year getting a close look at your feet. All right? I bet a lot of you are as angry about this as I am. Am I right? Well, okay. I was trying to listen through my shoes, you know, but mine have been deactivated, so I can't hear you. Anyway, it's not just the intelligence community that does stupid things with your money. A lot of state governments have used federal grant money to do some pretty stupid things, and I'm thinking of Arizona and Texas in particular, where you have governors who would like nothing better than to fence in the entire state. And so I want to show you something else here. Crude building materials, right? Little plastic or some kind of infuriated plastic, along with these iron bars. You would use them, say, in your hometown. If you wanted to create a gated community, you'd use this. Well, government spent a lot of money on junk like this, trying to completely seal in Texas, and they were moving pretty far along in the program there before it started to get unpopular. You see, first of all, the view from Texas to the outside world was really getting messed up. And after about 1/3 of the state was effectively closed off from the rest of the world by these crude gated community type junk partitions, well, people started saying, I can't even see the other side of El Paso from here. And mosquitoes, low-flying aircraft were having trouble with obvious navigational problems. And you know what's happened in Arizona, of course. Now we have militants all over the place, you know, patrolling that border, and they didn't finish fencing themselves in either. And it's a question of building materials. If I have time, I'll come back to that. But here's what I'm saying: it was a dumb idea in the first place, because what was it talking about? Illegal aliens coming across the border and what we had to do to stop them. Well, let me just back up to a little point earlier in the presentation. What is the one thing that the jungle highways are still being used for? Yeah, while most of you either don't know about them or wouldn't think of driving anywhere on the jungle highway system, which covers about 95% of the landmass of the United States, well, illegal aliens use them all the time. That's right, because nobody is in there paying attention. And so while Texas and Arizona were cloistering themselves off from the rest of the world, or in the process of so doing, much to the entertainment of our governor, I guess is as good a word as any, and much to the chagrin of the intelligent citizens in the state, well, what was going on? Well, the raison d'etre, the logical basis, the justification for the program, it was being absolutely laughed at, because you couldn't do it. And by the way, some of the illegal aliens got very clever and resourceful when these big gated community for an entire state operations were going on. They started simply boarding Greyhound buses disguised as right-wing lunatics. And who knows how many thousands of them got into the country that way. I do wish I had more time to explain the danger and the inconvenience that this has caused for low-flying aircraft, especially that piloted by mosquitoes. But you can check Scientific American or Popular Science, or maybe even watch CNN, and you can catch up on that story later. It's more important to me to talk about the things you may know nothing about. And as an example of something you may know nothing about, you probably figure the space program pretty much is kaput these days, like taken off the mainstream agenda, and funding all gone, nothing going on here. Space shuttles are just, driven across the country to berths in places like Los Angeles or New York, retiring the fleet and so on and so on. But you're wrong. You're wrong. The secret operations of the space shuttle in particular continue to this day. And I want to show you something. I want to tell you about a very secret project, Mona Freebird. Yes, Project Mona Freebird. And here, if we're talking about how we could save money so that all of us could live comfy lives and not have our salaries cut or not have our unemployment benefits cut, or, you know, let me just say one thing before I go here. You know, things got so bad in the time period between the fiscal cliff discussions and then this talk about the sea castrations, that the Girl Scouts were telling everybody they were all out of entitlements. Couldn't sell anymore this year. But they could. They could, if we could save money, you know, 40 billion here, 60 billion there, 200. All right, let's talk here for a minute about this program. Why do we have Mona Freebird, a top secret program? As far as I can tell, and you know, I do a lot of research here, so I'm not the kind of guy you can fool easily. I mean, you can fool me, but it's not easy. So I had my research staff look into this, and I actually have with me here top secret document, you know, in the form of these federal government top secret documents. You see a lot of color. Nope, don't get a close-up. I'd be in even more trouble than I am now. But having said that, what is Mona Freebird about, this project that keeps the space shuttle going? Well, Mona Freebird is a project in which some of our remaining astronauts are going to try to find out whether there really is an Omaha. Because you see, as far as many are concerned who are students of history, this whole idea of Omaha is pretty mystical. Let's just, well, and I should say mythical as well. No one really knows. Oh, sure. You go back into ancient history, you know, the Persian kings, for example, tried to find Omaha even before we had what was called the United States, and so did Vasco da Gama and that guy who was looking for the fountain of old age. All of these early explorers tried to find Omaha, and as far as we can tell, looking at history, it doesn't look like any of them were ever able to find it. And it is apparently very important to someone high up in the government, to find out if there really is an Omaha. Now, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can tell from all of my research there is no such place. And I ask you, I mean, when was the last time, you know, you're asking somebody you met, so where are you from? When was the last time anybody told you, I'm from Omaha? Huh? Okay. When was the last time you got a phone call from anybody who said, Omaha calling? When was the last time you got a postcard from somebody in Omaha? All right? Well, this is apparently important to some. Well, let me take it one step further, because this afternoon, just to make sure I wasn't deluding myself, I went to the internet. You know, you always go to Google to look something up, and let's say you were looking for a retired zipper salesman. It's, you know, people often do. I mean, I don't know how many times this year already I've looked for a retired zipper salesman. But say a retired zipper salesman in Omaha. You go to Google, and what's the answer going to be saying? Your search for a retired zipper salesman in Omaha returned no documents. All right. Maybe somebody has good reason to find Omaha, if it exists at all, and maybe they don't. maybe they don't. You know what the price tag is for that? Well, I don't. I tried to find out. But as far as I can tell, it's big money. It's big money because they've already recruited 11 astronauts to go on this, and I could say more that's in this top secret document, but then, you know, somebody would become, they'd be running in here and taking me off the air if I told you everything I know. Let's just say it's a lot of money, okay? And do you really need to know if Omaha is out there? Do you really think there's anything in Omaha that we need or need to find out about? I don't. I don't. That's not the, you know, everything I've told you about so far, big waste of money, right? Well, you'd think I'm almost at the end of the list, and I am not. I am not. Did you know, a lot of you have, who follow, you know, political science and current events, and especially what our intelligence community has done in recent years, you're familiar with the idea of CIA torture centers in other parts of the world where if we don't like somebody, and torture is technically speaking illegal here, even though you have to watch, you know, you have to watch TV, network TV, well, that's torture. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is most of those torture centers are not somewhere else. Look at this. Look at what I got for you. What do you think this is? This is something right here in my hometown of Houston, Texas, where, of course, we wanted to have a totally gated community state. Okay, but we foiled that operation, but we haven't foiled this. You see, these secret CIA torture centers like this, but not just like this. Some look like gas stations. I mean, these things are in every major urban area in the United States, like right here. And the problem with them is, you know, for a while the CIA could conduct its disgusting rendition programs here, and those are supposed to involve so-called terrorists, not that I agree with that. But what's happened a lot in recent years is that ordinary Americans thinking that looks just like a massage parlor. I'd like to go in there and visit. A lot of people walk into these places not knowing what they are, you know, and a lot of homeless people who have nowhere else to go think this looks like a good place to get out of the rain. And so, what can I tell you? These CIA torture stations that are all over the country, they don't seem to be doing any good, as far as I can tell. But they are getting a lot of innocent people in trouble with the law. And at what price? Well, you wouldn't believe it if I told you, but I'm going to tell you anyway. About $200 billion. $200 billion to maintain, once again, I can't really show you this top secret government report, but to maintain over 400 CIA torture stations just like that in these United States. Disgusting? Yes, it is. It's pretty disgusting. Well, not everything is that bad. I mean, that's evil and mendacious as far as I'm concerned. But some of the stuff is not quite that bad. There is a program that is based on trying to find homes for typewriters, and some of you younger people might not know what I'm referring to, because everything you've ever typed and most of what you've ever read was on a computer. Am I right? But you see, there was a time years ago when paper had a different use, and it was a different kind of paper than you see now. And these devices, primitive mechanical devices, were used to create documents of the sort you might recognize now. But this was all done manually. You see, the letters here on these keyboards of what we call a typewriter, they were a little different than what is on the keyboard you use today. And sure, you're going to have trouble finding one of these, so you're going to have to take my word for it. But the keyboard on one of these babies is completely different than anything you've ever seen. And so only old people can actually use them, or people who studied these typewriter keys and keyboards when they were going to college, getting a degree in something. So there is a government program which is intending to find good homes for the remaining typewriters in America. And they've been able to move some of them into rest homes where there actually are old people, and even where some old people wanted to use them. Problem is, some of these typewriter type machines are so old that they don't actually work anymore, and the old people, they think they're doing something wrong. It's not that the typewriter doesn't work anymore. They also have used a number of these in movies, you know, as props in movies for, you know, showing old time inventions and machines. And I am told that they can be used as a kind of farm, a piece of farm equipment. I don't actually understand it, but that was apparently the basis of the early federal program, was to move all of these things to farms, and apparently it didn't work out because, like I say, just like you would have trouble finding a zip code or an area code for Omaha, I bet you'd have a hard time if somebody asked you to find a typewriter tomorrow. Where would you look, you know? So, as I'm saying, this is a failed program. It was a good idea. I mean, I'm proud of people for trying to find a home for the old typewriters, but it's just not worth spending $22 billion right now, when that $22 billion could be buying you an extra hamburger or whatever it is you eat. Another ambitious program in terms of finding out things we don't know concerned a species of ghost, apparently a species of ghost. Let me see if I'm permitted to talk about this. Yes, reading the agreement I can. Let me show you a picture. You may have seen one of these yourself. During the summer, let's say you've been shopping, say at a big shopping center, and you're taking things out to your car, you may have seen one of these following you around. I know I have, quite a lot. And a lot of people worry about these things because they're amorphous. I mean, they're kind of like the abdominal snowman, you know. They look vaguely human. They tend to move right along with you. And so some people have worried incessantly about these things and demanded that somebody in government find out what they are. So in case you were asleep, say 5 or 6 years ago when this started, this was a program which was responding to public concerns because people just didn't know what to make of these things. Now, I really don't have that much to say about this subject, except that in my experience, they seem to be maybe people who died but forgot to bring their car keys with them. Or what's puzzling to me is that so many of them look like they could either be, you know, Bob Woodward prying around in somebody else's business, or or maybe Piers Morgan or somebody like that. But I don't think too many people care anymore, because when they go out to the parking lot, they see that there are just as many of these ghosts following everybody else as are following them. So do we need to, granted, we're only spending about $11 million on this project now, but I don't really care who these things are. They're not bothering me. They seem to be pretty harmless. Now, a lot of things have been done in the name of beautifying our cities. And one of them that's been, well, you may not appreciate the terminology of green places in your city depending on where you live. You know, you may not have any green places. But some of the cities that didn't have any green places applied for federal grants under a program that promised to give them some, just so they could spruce up the environment for everybody. And look what happened. The government shipped them cacti. Now, I have, you know, nothing against cacti as such, but in a lot of the areas where they were used to beautify, there were downsides to the operation. For one thing, people hurt themselves in a few cases, but what's worse is that under this pinch that we call the fiscal cliff and this coming sea castration event, a lot of people have cut back on the grocery budget, and so in several cities where the cacti have been put there to beautify things, people are stealing them and working on recipes, mostly Chinese stir fries and dishes like that, curries, trying to make these things work because they know they're edible, you know. And hey, free food, you see it and you take it. Bad news. Now, another thing that wastes a lot of money these days, and you may not have seen any of these, but you know the ordinary paper clip? The government built a few years ago some gigantic paper clips. These things are 11 feet high, and I don't know what they weigh. I know they're expensive. They're expensive as hell. And the uses of them, putatively, were to hold together our collapsing infrastructure. And in some cases, you know, you always hear that we have an aging U.S. bomber fleet. Apparently, there's something they do to hold the wings together with these giant 11-foot paper clips, but every one of them costs $40 million. And I don't think that's the efficient way to go. Do you? No, not when that $40 million could be buying something like a burger that you could eat so that you didn't have to eat cactus you stole from a beautification project. There are other horrible things in the budget that people can't even describe. For example, what I have a picture of here, I think these are supposed to be ancient weapons that were on tractors back in the age when there was a lot of tractor warfare. You know, armies of tractors would clash, but I'm not sure of that. I know that we spend a lot of money making these things, and one of my friends who's a musician says they're actually musical instruments. They don't look like it to me. And another friend believes they're reverse engineered, I don't know what, but he thinks at Area 51 you would find some of these that came off spacecraft, and we've been trying to duplicate them. Duplicate them at what cost? About $280 billion every year. Have I given you some big numbers so far? Yeah, what I have left here doesn't quite run up the numbers as much as these other things, but it still irritates me. You know, there was a program a lot of linguists were fond of that involved talking plants. People believed that you could get plants to talk, that there would be some value in that. I mean, we would know what plant life was really like. You know, people have, you know, tried to talk to dolphins and whatnot in the past because they're supposed to be smart, et cetera, et cetera. When they taught a few of these guys to talk, and this one is in my office building, these guys talk like sailors once you get them started. And so it's been very disturbing in my office complex. They're very rude to passersby, and some people think that they've even been responsible for some of the WikiLeaks. I'm not sure if that's true or not, But I can tell you that it seems to me to be a bad idea trying to get more plants to talk. I mean, because that's just one species. I mean, just imagine if we have all of them talking, you know, especially palm trees and well, I don't want rose bushes talking to me for one thing. But in any case, I think this project has wasted something like $32 million, and that could be better spent on finding out if walls could talk, because, you know, many pieces of music you might be familiar with refer to walls as possibly talking. And I think it might be a lot more interesting to spend that money finding out if the walls could actually tell us what they've heard, because these flora that are given the gift of gab, they turn out to be bad actors, you know, and just irritate people. So let's save the money, spend it on something else like us. There are, at last count, last time I looked, there are probably 55 or 60 remote outposts left in America. And these were built many years ago. I was able to interview somebody who works at one just recently. He was kind of tight-lipped, mostly because he didn't have anything to say anymore. I mean, I assumed that at some point he had been looking for signs of intelligent life, but he didn't even remember what he was looking for at his remote outpost anymore. So if we closed all 55 or 60, we'd save another $30 million. Now, science has always been interested in one-celled animals, but they've also been interested in two-celled animals. Why? Well, they thought that animals with two cells would be smarter or would be more interesting or whatever. Well, after spending something like $78 million looking at these two-celled animals, they found out that they were mostly paralyzed because one cell tended to disagree with the other, so these things rarely moved, they rarely made decisions, they didn't try to advance themselves, etc., etc., etc. Finally, I know that some of you have heard that elephants never forget. And because that is true, our government spent last year over $200 million trying to use elephants to do certain things. And even though the elephants don't forget what they were doing, most of the people who were in charge of the program that I was able to interview have forgotten what it is that they were teaching these elephants to do. But of course it had something to do with national security, if you believe that. So at the end of the day, what I've done for you is to demonstrate that even though some people are saying we have real bad economic times ahead of us because we have to go out there and cut spending for ordinary folks like us, the reality is that we have a lot of money that's being wasted right now that could be put to better use. You know it? We could probably get some intelligence on the next pope, or we could probably get some intelligence on the next winner of Dancing with the White-Collar Criminals, or we could do who knows what else. But I'd like it to be your decision and not the decision of the folks in Congress. And incidentally, one of the last big ideas we have for saving a lot of money is to get rid of the people in that building and use it for a museum for low-flying aircraft and mosquitoes. Until next time, friends, it's been a pleasure.
I spoke with Admiral Hershey before the rise and fall, but later at the office he would not